Hey, everybody. Welcome to our second podcast, videocast for relational leadership. I'm Stephanie Clements.
And I am Shawn Dawley.
Wow, now we got the microphone. He's sounding really, professional here. But definitely I'm excited about this one because I think it's so important in leadership where we're going to talk about authenticity and gaining respect.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that respect is important, not only from those below you, from those above you, our peers, it allows you to get a lot more done.
Sure. I mean, anytime the relationship you have with somebody, whether it's just simply an acquaintance, a friend, a coworker, somebody following you, somebody you're leading, if there is not some foundational component of respect, boy, it sure makes it hard for that relationship to be productive. If there is a relationship where respect is completely missing, that's probably one where both people are essentially using each other.
Right.
Like the other has something of value,
Sure.
And that's not a long-term sustainable dynamic.
Right. So we also, we were talking a little bit about dynamics, and the fact is that there's a lot of people in leadership positions that are not necessarily leaders. And to me, a leader is somebody that their dynamic makes you want to follow them.
Right.
Oh
yeah. We've all had those people that we've had to follow.
Right.
Because they had the formal authority. And then there's those people that you want to follow.
Right.
And at some point I stumbled into this idea where typically in an organization, nonprofit, athletic, commercial, if there's a real healthy culture and just a great vibe, basically what you find is that if that group of people were hypothetically picked up and dropped off on a deserted island, the leadership structure probably wouldn't change as much.
Right.
Because there's something intrinsic about people's, really true desire. Whereas if you think about organizations that are highly dysfunctional, you recognize that, once that leader loses whatever formal authority they have, it is going to go from zero to Mad Max dystopian Thunderdome in a heartbeat, right? Because they only have nothing but authority to rely upon.
Right. So I think, one of the, and I experienced this myself because I went to work for my dad.
Okay.
And, when you go in, everybody is immediately a bit critical.
Sure.
Of the special treatment,
sure.
For me, my dad was that much harder on me.
Right.
To make sure that I didn't look like I was getting special treatment. And that was very frustrating for me as starting off in my career at the time because
how old were you?
I started working for him whenever I was 20.
Oh, okay.
And so I was young.
Yeah,
it's been a little while, very new to the workforce, and realizing that, I was having to be the one. If somebody had to stay late, it was going to be me. He wasn't going to ask somebody else. If somebody had to come in on a weekend, it was me.
Yeah.
Those kind of things. And so, to gain the respect of those that I worked with, I had to work harder. But that's not always the case when a kid comes in. Sometimes they are given special treatment.
There can be a bit of an entitlement mentality, and family dynamics are already difficult enough, right? And at 20, that's that transition from childhood to adulthood.
Right.
And my youngest is 22, and so I appreciate how as your kids get older, and as you once upon a time were the kid, the relationship between mom and dad with the children, it has to change, right?
Right.
A few weeks back, I can't remember what exactly it was that my wife did, but my 22-year-old soon to graduate from IU son was like, "Mom, my goodness gracious!" She's like mothering him, right?
Uh-huh.
And it reminded me of when I had just graduated pilot training. So we're at the ceremony, and I'm standing in a small circle with other now card-carrying U.S. Air Force aviators. And my mom is standing there, and I've got wings on my chest, and I'm feeling, puffed up, good about myself. And in my periphery, I see her looking up at me. And before I could react, she licks her palm and goes and wipes down my hair. I'm like, Mom, like I'm all grown up, like you can't do that, right?
Right.
But I told my son, I said, buddy, I don't know at what age they will stop mothering you. It's not 49, I'll tell
Yeah,
you that.
right.
But as you transition into adulthood, you take what is already a tenuous dynamic, and then you interject it into the workforce.
Yeah.
And I could only imagine how tough that might have been to navigate. Because,
Yeah.
like you said, you knew in your heart of hearts that your dad was being a little bit harder on you than he might have been if you were just somebody
Yeah,
off the street.
right.
And yet, despite all that, some number of people, no matter what he did, no matter how you acted, would probably always assume
Yeah, that I had it easier.
nepotism.
Yeah.
She just walked right into it.
Right, right. So, and then on the other side of that, now, you know, I own a company,
Yeah.
brought my son in and had to let him know, I'm like, this isn't a gift. You know, you are going to be, you know, eventually the leader
Yeah.
of this, but it's not a gift. And you have to earn it, and you've got to get in and be able to do the work, because I do believe that unless you know and you've done it,
Mhm.
it's hard to tell somebody the expectations, and that's not always going to be the case where you have to get in and do it, but they can respect it a lot more. I worked for somebody who felt like we should be able to make a certain number of sales calls every day for things, and it really wasn't a workable number if you were going to create any kind of relationship.
Yeah.
As you're calling.
I'm curious, was the person who established that high bar somebody who had done that job previously?
No.
Oh, okay.
See, so that's where I say, if they had
yeah.
done that,
Yeah.
they would know this is the expectation. But
Sure.
to come in and do it, and, you know, and them saying, we need these numbers, so this is what you need
Right.
to do.
Yeah.
And it left people feeling defeated instead, because they couldn't meet the expectations.
Right.
And so,
Right.
And then realizing and becoming more angry because you've never done it. You don't know.
Yeah.
So why are you getting on to me for not having made that when I'm out there hitting the pavement every day? You know?
That's right. And people watch the boss closely, right?
Yes.
So, you know, as a leader, you have to figure out quickly that everything you do, everything you don't do, everything you say, every time you were silent is being observed.
Right.
And people will sometimes erroneously attach any number of motivations to it. Well, the reason she did this or the reason he didn't do that. And then they'll, in the absence of information, sometimes just manufacture it. But as a boss, I feel like there's two components. If you have done to some degree what the people are doing that you're leading, it provides you some objective familiarity. Like you actually have some true insights into the nature of the product, you know, the good or the service.
Sure.
But then beyond that pure tangible familiarity with it, when they on a gut level know that, okay, the boss has done this.
Right.
You know, the boss has been out in the rain digging that ditch. You know, the boss has made those late night sales calls. You know, there's something that provides you credibility there.
Sure.
That is really hard to arrive at any other way. Now, the CEO at Ford is probably not expected on the second shift to operate the forklift, to move raw materials, right? You know, so to some degree, the higher up you go, just by necessity, more and more of the operation will be things with which you have no firsthand experience. And yet, somehow people always kind of know if you're the type of man or woman that has done the types of things that they've done, right? And empathy.
You're not scared to get your hands dirty, that you're willing to do those things.
That's right.
But you've worked your way up, that you don't, you know, I mean, and a very similar, I mean, I own a remodeling company, right? So I have not done all of those jobs. I've done some, and so that's where I have to rely on my team and the guys to know what they're doing, and trust them also to be able to do those things.
Sure.
And so then that just becomes a relationship. So, you know, I can guarantee you don't want me hanging drywall. I'm not good at it, you know. You know, but I have attempted. I mean, we just were able to go ahead. There's nothing in there I'm not willing to try.
Yeah. So in a previous life, when I joined the Air Force at 17, for 4 years, I was a mechanic, at least on paper. And I did not have a strong mechanical aptitude. You know, I was not good at it. I was just not, I was never going to be a great, aircraft maintenance technician. So years later, people are like, well, how can that be? How can you fly them? I say, well, flying them and breaking them is different
than fixing them.
And so
Right.
like, I would not trust my family's life in an airplane that I had worked on.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I might be able to land it on short final, with an engine shutdown and strong crosswinds. Just don't ask me to replace the fuel pump.
Right. No,
Right.
I get it.
And so in a couple leadership jobs ago, I was leading a really diverse medical operation. Now, I have zero clinical background, and a few hundred people that were in my organization were, MDs, DOs, nurse practitioners, a couple hundred RNs. And so once I had established, from an executive level, my leadership credibility, I would go to different stations, triage or, emergency response, and would ask like somebody, a 25-year-old LVN, hey, can you show me how to do this? But without us violating any medical laws. And they found it adorable.
Yeah.
Like the boss was just like, oh my gosh, this is the guy that leads us. Like, because they thought it was cute how little I knew about the nuts and bolts of what they did. And yet I think they appreciate it.
Sure.
He could be anywhere else, but he's here right now.
Yeah.
Right.
So now I believe, for us to gain respect, it is showing respect also. So the same, if you were leading troops in the trenches, it's taking command, but not necessarily not demeaning, and listening and valuing input, because I don't have all the answers.
Right.
That's
right.
Let's do it.
Right.
But when it all comes down to it, I've got to be the one to make the decisions, because, it's me on the line.
Yeah.
And so you have to do that. But when you're willing to listen, then they respect, you end up that mutual respect.
One of the things that it took me a while to figure out, and once I cracked the code, I was more purposeful at expanding my skill set, which is we all, by personality disposition, might have one or two leadership styles that we naturally lean into every time.
Right.
And again, while I would never try to equate the boss and the team with like the mom and the kids, I'll just use that example. It's one thing for a mom to gently help her 3-year-old know why she should put her toys away. But when that same 3-year-old is about to walk into a busy intersection,
right,
mom's got to find a different leadership style, much more commanding, authoritative. And in both instances, those two different styles were correct. And so early on, I had a relatively limited spectrum of leadership tools. And what I found was that they were not always ideally suited to both the people and the context at hand. And slowly, as I figured that out the hard way, I began to expand out, the number of different things you can go to. Yeah.
Well, we've talked about that before, even with our kids. Sometimes they'll ask, they always want to know why, but why, and there were times where I'm just like, y'all, it doesn't matter, because I'm the mom. That's why. Because I'm tired of explaining every single decision. And that, at some point you have to just say, because that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
There are other times that I could sit down and explain, there are these dangers, there are these things, when there was time, sit and discuss it, and we would talk through those things, and a lot of times they could understand.
Sure.
Other times I had to say, something, this isn't anything, it's nothing your fault. You're never going to be able to understand, because you are not a parent and you haven't seen the things that I've seen.
Yeah.
And I can guarantee when you become a parent, you're going to be like, I totally get why mom wasn't comfortable with this.
Yeah.
But, and I just have to say, you're not going to understand until you have your own kids.
That's right. The age old challenge, and finally, because, like you said, look, because I said so.
Right.
And sometimes even in a workplace setting, we live in a pretty touchy-feely, era, right? But there are times when the nature of a problem necessitates a leader to be extremely commanding in his or her delivery.
Sure.
If we are planning the company Christmas party, then that's going to probably be consultative, collaborative, democratic.
Right.
If the fire alarm goes off and one of the exits is blocked with smoke, if the leader stands up and barks that we are all going out that door, starting back to front, do not skip line, single file, that exercise of authoritative leadership is extraordinarily appropriate
Right.
for that moment, right? And again, that's where I try to encourage people. If you have a style or two that is most natural, don't apologize for it, because there are times when that is needed. Just be mindful that there may be other ways, based on the circumstances. Yeah.
Well, I think it's important too. I mean, I have had employees who wanted to question everything I did, and I've always tried to be willing to listen to ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, maybe it's better, but there's also timing in that. And I mean, when you have a full busy day and things need to get done, you don't have time. And so this is from whether if you're an employee or a child or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
there is a timing and an approach where you can discuss other ideas.
Right.
In the middle of getting things done.
That's right.
Isn't
That's
the
right.
time, which is probably going to undo what you might have, what you might gain by coming at the right time and talking about it. Whereas if you're one of those who's constantly just questioning everything when you need to get done, you just become annoying at that point. That's just it.
And right. And after a while, you can typically detect what is motivating that person to ask why. Because some people, they ask the leader why a lot because they genuinely want to grow and develop, and they're curious.
Right.
Okay, they are genuinely curious. How did you arrive at that decision? What were the variables you were considering?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the people that are pretty easy to figure out. They're just ankle biters, and that's their passive aggressive way of they're too scared to confront. They're bitter, they're miserable, and their way is to pretend like I'm posing these benign questions when really this is your passive aggressive way of trying to undermine the legitimacy of whatever I decided. And fortunately, they're not nearly as good at conveying that as they think they are, because sincerity over the long run is probably the hardest attribute to fake.
Right.
Your people, right, that you've led, they'll know. They don't have to like you or agree with you or a particular decision, but I don't know. I mean, do you think that empathy is something that in the short run you might be able to fool somebody, but in the long run?
Yeah. I mean, people can, and I can take this into the whole, even the dating world, right? I mean, they tell you date somebody for 4 seasons at least because you see but people can put on a show for a little while.
Yeah.
But the true who they are comes out eventually. And whether that's as a boss, I mean, there have been organizations and small companies and things like that I've worked for where from the outside it looked like, oh man, that's got to be a great place to work. And and I did have a boss at one point, it was awful, but he was very good at show. So in front of, hey, we're going to do this for the community and blah, blah, and things like that, because it gave him the press. But when you were in the office with him,
it's not the vibe you picked up on.
No, it was not, and people would walk in and just like waiting to see what the mood of what his mood was going to be and how you were going to tiptoe around things. And, but on the camera and when you saw him, they're like, man, people come in, it must be great to work here. And I'm like, yeah. So the leader needs to set that mood. That's where, I mean, real leadership, it's your true self. You're going to be authentic. You're going to be sincere. And that is going to make people want to follow.
I think so. And if you were to ask people, name your favorite coach, name your favorite teacher, name your favorite aunt or uncle as a kid, they're probably not going to say, "Oh, well, it was this coach, teacher, and because they were, maybe the smartest or
Right.
had won the most awards." It's probably somebody that made that person you're asking feel safe, trusted, valued,
Mm-hmm.
worthy. And sometimes, due to the managerial demands on us as leaders, right, keeping all the trains running on time,
Right.
we sometimes get so busy we overlook those simple but foundational emotional components. Like, so if you're hitting every number, if you're looking good on camera, like this
Right.
preceding
Right.
boss, wonderful. But in the long run, because I wrote down a word there you said about the mood. I mean, nobody has their hand on the rheostat of the temperature of an organization like the leader.
Right.
And there is nothing worse than walking into a place where you have to first figure out what kind of a mood is the boss in. Do I need to be on eggshells today? Boy, that can really wear you down.
Right.
And for some people, that can trigger some deep-seated emotional anguish because they may have grown up in a household, right, where somebody, a mom or a dad or a sibling or
Yeah.
right. And so we're not people's psychologists or therapists, but as a leader, something, mistakes I made sometimes was just letting that show too much.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in a sour mood. Before you know it, there's like a gray cloud over the entire building.
Right.
And it was
Right.
my fault.
Yeah.
It was my fault. And so I couldn't agree with you more that that sincerity and empathy in the long run is you got to be a real sociopath to be able to fake that.
Yeah.
We're going to sniff that out eventually.
Well, so we talk, authenticity, and I actually went to a women's networking event where this probably 10 years ago, but talked about, and they were talking about authenticity, and people it's amazing that when you're authentic, it comes out very quickly.
Yeah.
And I was grouped in with these women, with a group of women to talk, and I had not met any of them. And they were talking about things that they think make you authentic or this or that. And one of them turned and looked at me and they were like, it's you. You're authentic. And I was like, oh, wow. Because you're not trying. You're just
Right.
being yourself.
Yeah.
And being willing to learn and
Yeah.
being willing to listen. So you're right. I mean, it's not something you can fake.
Yeah.
It's not.
Well, yeah. I mean, the way you're saying it, I'm thinking, I don't want to get into semantics, but I'm wondering, like, authenticity isn't necessarily something you create. It might be something that you simply reveal because
Mhm.
it's there or it isn't.
Right.
With Thunder over Louisville, upon us, it sparked my memory as we're talking about authenticity. I was at what is called a red flag exercise. It's in Nellis near Las Vegas. It's a huge combat exercise held every so often where there's just a ton of aircraft that show up. Anyway, after each day, there would be this massive debrief where every plane that flew is represented in this auditorium. And the first couple of formations stand up and everything was recorded. Everybody's got a tracker. I mean, your business is on Front Street.
Right,
Everybody knows
right.
what happened. And the first few flights of aircraft, their flight leads stand up and had excuses. Why we didn't do this and why this went wrong. Then about the third or fourth plane to stand up was the flight lead for the F-22 Raptors, which is the meanest air superiority aircraft on the planet. There is no plane that beats the F-22. And this guy was the flight lead of that package. So he's the alpha in this room. And he stands up and he leads with the mistakes he made that at different times throughout that 4-hour ordeal created missed opportunities or problems. Well, when the most qualified aviator in the room in front of 400 people stands up and pulls the curtain back on all the mistakes he thought he made, what do you think that did to the tone? I mean, every person from that point forward suddenly took that approach.
Right.
And it made the people that were basically playing, jailhouse lawyer seem really like small and petty. And
right.
Boy, I remember that exchange like it was yesterday. That was probably 10 years ago. Because that was authentic.
Yeah.
That was obviously a man who was self-assured. He knew what he was all about. and he was going to lead with some deficiencies.
Right.
And that just created that had a monumental impact on the entire tone of the room.
Well, when we are setting out and our goal is strictly to impress somebody else and other people, and we want, you know, we want to be respected. I deserve to be respected. I'm the best in my class. Things like that.
Yeah.
It has a bit of an opposite effect because, again, you can smell out phony.
Yeah.
If you're trying too hard to be what you want everybody to believe, that that whole fake it till you make it is
it's
not
cute, but
right.
It's a cute slogan,
Right.
but it doesn't have like long-term utility. I don't think.
No. Going through now that to me, I've used that term, fake it till you make it, but it's more about going through the habits that you want to make.
Mm-hmm.
If I know that I want to be somebody who works out every morning, and I want to be fit, and I want, I'm like, and because I can't fake being muscle bound, or I can't, those sort of things.
Yeah, there's some, right.
But I'm going to do everything that they do until I get there. So I just think a lot of times fake it till you make it is more of a going through the habit, the habit making actions that will get you to where you want to be, but not necessarily trying, it's just still a fine line because it still needs to be you.
Right. And, nobody's ever accused me of being a neuroscientist, but I know enough about the physiology of our neuroanatomy to know that there's this miraculous little component called the basal ganglia that is foundational to the development of both good and bad habits.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, whatever the wellspring of your ethos is, it's hard to really come up with a habit, good or bad, that doesn't somehow flow from whatever's inside of you.
Right.
It's hard to be like a wonderful person and develop like an evil habit, or be an evil person and develop an altruistic habit. But through things like, you brought up a tangible example about exercising. I mean, if we know that there are certain behaviors that we should begin to engage in, they might not come natural or feel comfortable at first, but through repetition, you are rewiring the neurotransmitters in your brain to say, okay, that we're going to keep doing this. And eventually it can create some inertia on its own. And even things such as empathy or sincerity or expressing, genuineness in a conversation, that's a behavior that can actually be developed.
Yeah.
It just takes us sometimes slowing down.
Yeah.
And exactly. The first time I dribbled a basketball, it looked all, uncoordinated and discombobulated. It probably still looks that way. But, we kind of expect, hey, if I do this every day, it'll eventually look and feel and come off natural.
Right.
Interpersonal skills, I think, are kind of the same way.
Yeah.
If you're starting from a good, noble motivation.
Right. So, well, we are about out of time, but you've got, again, Thunder over Louisville this weekend. So you will be one of the voices and MC.
A narrator, right. So once upon a time, I flew in Thunder. Then they asked me to help organize it. Then they asked me just to narrate it. Eventually, they're going to put me in a corner and say, why don't you just watch it? They're slowly removing my responsibilities. Yeah. There's younger, better men and women, Shawn, that can do this. We'll let them have a crack.
Right. Well, you're still in there, so
and you can't beat the view. 24th floor of the Galt House, right, show center, working with a great team of people. I'm blessed to do it. I really am.
So, that is, that is a whole group of leaders. In that room, that come together and are able to allow and look at, one person has more talent in this area, and so they're going to lead here.
Yeah.
And another person has more talent in this area, so that they're willing to work as a team,
right,
and do that.
And that's maybe a good point to wrap it up on. It's consistent with what we've been talking about. In many of those cases, the organizational chart, if you will, for Thunder over Louisville is extremely populated with dotted lines. There's not a lot of hard and fast, like HR facilitated relationships.
Right.
It's a lot of just mutual respect and trust, such that when you have the talent or resources to fulfill a small need and you're asked to do it, people just roll their sleeves up and do it.
Right.
Nobody says, "Well, you're not my official boss. You can't order me." You don't hear that at all. And I think if that person would quickly ostracize themselves from that group. That is a very collegial and collaborative group, and there's a reason that some of the people who are doing it under the overall tutelage of Wayne Hedinger, who was there from ground zero. Some of those people have been with us for 30 years.
Yeah.
Some of the originals are still doing it. And how do you get people to volunteer for 3 decades? There has to be trust, respect, and all those things we've been talking about.
So, all right. Well, thank you guys for joining us. We will be back next week, but this will be, if it did get missed, it'll be on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and on some of the podcast sites. So we appreciate you joining us, and we'll see you next time. Maybe. Yeah.